Hello everyone, welcome to Adventures Through the Mind. I am your host, as always, James W. Jesso. If you listen to the show regularly, you might have noticed that there was a very different intro music this time around. I haven't switched it up permanently. This is a temporary addition to the show that was brought to us graciously by Kalya Scintilla, who is one of the guests on the show today. The song that you just heard is called Acacia, and it's off his album, Listen to the Trees. I felt like it was a good idea to start the show with a little bit of the music that Kalya makes because our guest today, Kalya Scintilla, also known as Yaegon, and because our guests today, Kalya Scintilla and Eve Olution, are an incredible musical and stage performance duo that incorporate a profound philosophical approach into their artistic expressions. And on top of just having a really interesting philosophical underpinning to their creativity and to the art that they produce, they are also incredibly talented and produce one hell of an epic stage show. And I think I want to clarify here by stage show, the experience that they create for the dance floor and the experience that they create almost as like the center beacon of an energetic field that they put out with the music and with Eve's performance art has an incredible impact on the energetic quality or the emotional, psychological, spiritual quality of the space of the dance floor. And I personally have been wonderfully touched by the spaces that they create together and feel very grateful to have known this duo for the last few years and have had multiple opportunities to sit and talk and get to know each other. And I'm even more grateful to have featured them on the show for you to check out. I won't say too much more about them here because you're about to learn a whole lot about what goes behind that which they bring to the world through their art and through their performances. But before the interview begins, I'm just going to send a huge thank you to my patrons on Patreon, especially those people whose names are written in the upper corner of this episode on YouTube and listed in the description to this episode on jameswjesso.com. Without the support of my patronage, I would not be able to continue to create this content for y'all to enjoy. So a huge thank you to them and a huge thank you to those who are leaving one-time PayPal or Bitcoin donations. You, the listener, if you have yet to, can become a patron or leave a donation by checking out the links contained in the description to this episode. You could also head to jameswjesso.com/support to see all the potential support options, including the 3 already listed: Patreon, PayPal, Bitcoin. All right, so that's it for the intro into the interview today with Eve Olution and Kalya Scintilla here on Adventures Through the Mind. Enjoy. So the last time we saw each other was it in Hungary? Or no, at Sci-Fi Festival in Amsterdam, is that right? Or in Netherlands?
I think so, yeah. Or was it? No, wasn't it up in? Yeah, it was up at up in BC at Motion Notion.
That's right. Yeah, we saw each other at Motion Notion as well last summer.
Yeah.
Well, the reason I want to bring that up is because there's this beautiful sense of something special that seems to come out whenever I attend your sets. There's something special that comes up whenever we all hang out, which is great. But in particular to your performance, there's something unique and something beautiful that I wouldn't say isn't present with other acts, but happens to be quite present. There always seems to be some sort of, for myself, some sort of emergent magic that seems to defy all logic that happens every time I participate in one of your performances. So maybe to start us off, we'll focus specifically on what it is that you do, both independently and then as a collective. So starting with each of you, and you can decide who speaks first, but what it is that you're doing, and then what it is that you're doing as a collective, beyond just playing groovy tunes and a performance.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I was just going to summarize by saying I make beats. But no, to take it a bit deeper than that, my intention is to just create immersive musical worlds that inspire and awaken something inside an individual or a collective. And it's been inspired by nature and by life experience, and more recently when Eve came into my life, by mythology and ancient stories and ancient cultures. Yeah.
Yeah. And so my world is very much in the theater realms, and I studied theater since I was pretty much a kid. I went to college for the visual arts, and I graduated with a bachelor's degree in theater and had a children's theater right after college. And so I immersed inside of that before moving to California. And when I moved to California, I basically got invited to a belly dance performance, and I had never seen belly dance. And one of the girls there connected with me, and it felt like I entered a whole new reality in a whole new dimension. And she invited me to my first festival. And at my first festival, I met all these fire performers, and it was in the LA and San Diego area. So they were professionals, and to me, I had never seen any of this, so I was dazzled. But the one thing that stuck out to me was that everybody was working individually. So there was, solo performers, but no one was quite working together as a collective, and I couldn't find any theater. So I thought, hey, this is my job, my role. So I started talking to these women who I really had only just met, and asked them straight out if they would be in a production that I would create. I didn't even know what that production was going to be, but they said yes. And I was smitten. I was like, wow, these people don't even know me, and they're saying yes to collaborating with me. And so then several months later, when another festival came, I did my first production. And after my first production, all the performers were wanting to know who I was and where I'd come from, because they wanted to be a part of my creations. So that's when my solo project started, and continued to work then with basically women who were talking about goddesses, but they didn't know the stories of them. And so I started researching and finding all of the mythology to work as a base platform. And when the first production went up, basically that's when the real magic happened. This dimension of something beyond us opened, and I was hooked. And so then I started studying transpersonal psychology. I started really immersing myself inside of the mythos, archetypal work predominantly, and started experimenting every single production with different kinds of pantheons, with different kinds of performers, and started curating a formula. And then that's what has led me up to this point, this current point that I'm at, which is really going deep with the embodiment practices and the ancient mythology as an actual ancient technology that we're using, and then moving that into the music.
Great. So then, as a collective, with your two skills involved, how would you describe we'll say the intent, but as well as the philosophical basis of what it is that you're doing when you're performing as a team?
It's kind of like just creating a field of potential that has it's filled with like keys and codes and mysteries and pieces of the like cosmic puzzle and the earthly puzzle, and just from all of our influences and all the sort of ceremonial and ritual things that happen in our life, and like we bring all this stuff into the art with intention or with like magic and spells, and then it's just creating this field of potential that is available for someone to step into and be immersed in, and then have like an aha moment where they capture something in that field of potential and they know what to do with it within themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We're weaving a lot of, when we say ritual or intention, it's basically saying out loud what we intend to do. And usually that main intention is just to become present and to become a conduit of presence, because we strongly feel that the music and the performance are acting like gateways to invite people into connecting with themselves and their bodies, the earth, and then from that connection, they're basically opening into consciousness, and you can go into altered states even without any kind of external. You can actually access these things, and that's the way our ancestors used them a long time ago. Was the music and the performance was actually as a gateway of communion with the unseen realm. And so these are really old technologies that we are bringing our modern minds to, and then cultivating more of a relationship with the Eastern philosophies of presence and connecting with the body in a mindful way to then open these gateways and doorways. And when we do this again and again and again, there is a real physical experience for people. And that's really what we're aiming for. We're curating this and taking notes of what's working, what's not working, and then going back into the studio and intentionally laying down prayer or story that we think that people need right now on the planet. So we're using this medicinally through our intention and through our research, and again through all of these ancient technologies that have really been forgotten in our modern world, but we need them right now. So we use them in a medicinal way.
Yeah, music, dance, and performance all as a sacred medicine is a really interesting concept. Maybe dialing in a little bit deeper to the two sides of what you offer. Yaegon, I'll start with you. What is the role of music in this process of opening up this ritualistic space? Like, what is the impact of music? What is the sound vibration? And what does the sound vibrations offer to the experience of the listener and the dancer? And mixed in with that, maybe you could explain something I've heard you say somewhere else, which is mandalas of sound.
Yeah, so I guess I can look back to periods in my life when I had moments of communing with music that gave me like a revelatory experience where I came out of it changed somewhat, just from listening to an album and, by myself in a room. And I gained a lot of like clarity and insight as I journeyed with the music deep within myself. And then again, when I first came into the trance, like the psychedelic trance scene, I had another revelatory moment where I was launched into this like state of trance. And when I came out of it at the end of this one set, it was like I'd found this hidden, lost thing within myself and the universe. And so that was when I started to realize the power of music and dance on a dance floor, And so I would start to go to the dance floor specifically to attempt or intend to capture these moments where I could go deep into the trance, and all of a sudden in this state of trance it felt like I'd have this link up with something like higher. I'd link up with the earth, and then I'd link up with the stars, and in this place all this information would stream in. And it was changing my life in a very rapid way, very fast. So I kind of got a little bit hooked on it. Every trance party that was happening in Australia, I was like, oh, let's drive to that one, let's go to this one and that one. Maybe it's going to happen again. And yeah, it's not really something I could talk to many people about at that time in Australia. So I kind of just was on the journey myself, and it was very much self-discovery. So then when I sat down and started to attempt to recreate this within my own music, it just came simply from a place of intention. And I realized that if I sat in my studio and I spoke words out loud, like I cast these spells of my spelling, those things would show up in the music. If I intended a song to be about connecting with the trees, then when I get to the end of that musical piece, there was something about, I don't know, the textures and the flavors and the feeling of trees in there. And even if I didn't use the sound of wood or whatever, or leaves. But so yeah, it's kind of been this ongoing thing where I've got this intention and this idea of what I want to achieve, but it's very much a mystery. I can go on the journey and create the music and intend for this field to be filled with all these intentions, but what I'm starting to realize now is that it goes even deeper than that, and that there's other aspects of things that are happening to me that are ending up in the music without my intending, because I'm sitting there and creating this field of creativity. It feels like all these things that are me are just kind of ending up in there. And a good example was someone recently told me that a friend of theirs had listened to my music and quit heroin. They were a heroin addict, and they quit heroin, and it was 6 months later that this person told me, 6 months ago, my friend listened to one of your albums and he quit heroin, and he's now clean 6 months later. And that was when I started to realize, oh wow, okay, so over the last few years I've dealt with a lot of addiction stuff within my realm, many addictions to different things, and not just substance addiction, actual real world things as well. And so I realized in that moment, oh, okay, so all the things that I'm doing when I do self-work and I clear stuff within my being, these things are kind of showing up in the tapestry of the music. So it is like a mandala. It's like on a physical level, you've got waves of sound, like pulses of energy, but they're kind of like carriers for this, all the intentions and all the stories that you want to go in there. We can have songs that we write where there's an intention to connect with ancient Egypt, and then someone will come to us, we don't write about it in the song. I mean, the song might have a Middle Eastern-y vibe to it, but we're not intending to take people into the pyramids and the temples. But then someone comes to us and is like, oh, hey, my girlfriend and I, we journeyed to this music, and during that one song, we went through these temples and pyramids, and we don't, write that in the notes or anything, but people are getting it, which is really cool. And it starts to give us validity to the magic that we're weaving in there.
Mm-hmm. And so is that, maybe you could take a moment to just specifically clarify how that relates to the concepts of mandalas of sound, because maybe even explain first what you understand a mandala to be, and then explain that premise mandala of sound.
Yeah, so a mandala is it's like this multifaceted, multi-dimensional, intentional piece. I mean, if we look at it as like a mandala that's created from nature, it's like a pattern. But a mandala that's created by a human is like a deep devotional meditation. Like the classic one would be Tibetan, where they spend huge amounts of time creating this most exquisitely beautiful, detailed mandala of sand. And it's like this, this thing that resonates with color and beauty, and all the prayers and focus and intention is in that. And then, of course, they have the impermanence of it where they just sweep it away at the end, even if they've worked on it for a month, So, yeah, in the sound, it's like putting all these pieces together is happening from a meditative state. Like when I'm in the studio and I'm focused, there isn't really a linear, logical, calculated mind that's at the front. At the front is like this kind of mysterious presence, and then the calculations are kind of happening at the back to make sure that everything lines up in the mandala. So there's like a conscious awareness that when the two speakers are pulsing out the sound waves, it's creating this weaving of all these layers of sound. And so I do my best to visualize how these patterns come out. And, I do this through different tunings and different textures. And yeah, it's like a very complex and heady process, but at the same time, I have trouble explaining it because it happens very effortlessly when you're in the flow state.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Eve, how about your side of things? You are a very, say, simply put, a performance artist, and you're doing a theatrical performance. What role is your theatrical performance playing in this weaving of bubbles of potential, and what is it that you're doing? How does that relate to what you were saying before about the power of myth and the mythos?
Mm-hmm. So the biggest piece and the biggest role that I think Yaegon and I both connect on, I'll start there and then kind of move to my side, which is we're both storytellers. And we both believe that the music and the performance is ultimately carrying a message. And the metaphor of this whole reality or this whole dance of life that we play, in the Hindu pantheon, it's called the Leela. But it's basically saying that this whole reality is a play. And so we're weaving the stories inside of it, and I get to be a director. So not only am I a playwright, I get to write the play and the story that goes in, but I also get to direct it. And when I work with Yaegon in the studio, we become co-directors, and we're steering and guiding certain elements, especially inside of the album work of where we want to go. So we'll take Open Ancient Eyes, for example, is a first part of a 3-part pantheon that we're working on. And the new album that's going to come out is the second part of the story. And the first album was based on the hero's journey. And so this is the work of Joseph Campbell. And for those who don't know who Joseph Campbell is, he basically wrote a hero's journey that then became the blueprint for Star Wars, one of the most classic stories of modern time. And the reason it's classic is because it holds the blueprints of every story that's ever been told on the planet. And so that was the work of Joseph Campbell. And so for Yaegon and I, we understand that the stories are pieces of the puzzle to unlock our soul potential. Mm-hmm. And we're very dedicated to the awakening of the planet, of our tribes and our family and of ourselves. I don't think that there's kind of this idea that you attain enlightenment and then it's over. And I don't believe that that's true. I believe that, it's chop wood, carry water, become enlightened, chop wood, carry water. It's this practice of continual awakening, continual looking at the unconscious. And so the performance is really a medium to start opening doorways into the unconscious. And when I'm up there, I strongly root inside of theater and not so much dance, especially in the electronic dance music scene. Many people use the word dancer when they see someone on stage, and that's the norm. But I really distinguish myself away from that because I am not a trained classical dancer. I'm a theater artist, and so yes, I'm using movement up there, but it's to tell a story, and ultimately I'm a character, and so I do my best to change my costumes all the time to bring that element of the theatrical, and I use my face and my hands as my main areas of focus, not so much my body moves or focusing so much on the visual journey, but more about the energetic, the emotional, and again, using the performance to invite people into their unconscious, into their subconscious layers of themselves, and to ignite something inside of them that they don't even realize until they're in the moment and they're receiving me, and then they're receiving what the feeling is of what's going on. So it's working with a lot of subtle energies, and the dance floor is actually really prime for that, because usually people are closing their eyes and they're tuning in, and the performance isn't so much needed. I mean, you can look at it, but I'm very much affecting the dance floor just by emitting the particular archetypes that I'm going for, and the whole dance space will start to change and to feel me, even if they're not looking at me. So as a theater artist, it's really exciting playground to experiment and to really tap into the potential of what performance can do, and moving it away from this entertainment dimension that we're kind of inside of as a modern culture, and moving it back into the ancient, and moving it back into its roots.
Yeah, like the roots of a sacred invocation of energies that are beyond the normal operational sense of self in our daily lives. In fact, I think the name of your art project is Evocation, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to evoke, so to embody. To invoke is to call forward. So if we invoke, right, we invite something, we're energetically in, but when we evoke, we're asking to actually embody whatever it is that we're setting in our attention for. So that's really what I'm doing. I'm evoking every single time, and the performers that work with me also go into a deep training to do the same thing, to learn this art form.
Let's take a little bit of a step out from the intentions and into the environment, because an experience such as what you're offering can only offer, your capacity to offer it will be very much sort of conditioned or defined by the environment that you're in, and you could do your absolute best to create a specific type of environment, but certain environments are a little bit more conducive to it than other environments. And I'm really alluding towards this developing theme or meme of a transformational music festival. I'm curious if you can unpack where you see, insofar as the reawakening of ancient ritualistic practices in the modern world, where you see festival culture sitting inside of that process.
Yeah, festival culture is like, again, a place for potential to touch this, to invite it back in. The festival culture is the most tribal thing that we have in our modern societies in the West. And yeah, it's ripe to have a platform to bring this in. And in Australia, we often invite Indigenous tribes or the people who are custodians, the original custodians of that part of the land. And it's awesome to feel that come into a festival Indigenous people coming in and sharing story and song and dance, because it kind of just gives us a little like trigger of a memory of like, oh yeah, this is what happened before, and this is, you know, we're doing a version of this now. I would say that we're still kind of in kindergarten in a lot of ways, because there's still this like focus on, you know, how big is the sound system and amazing is the lights and how flashy is this and that. And there's a lot of emphasis on the technology. And, yeah, there's still not this real deep cohesiveness of the tribe being invited into a place where there's a lot more focus on how to connect with an ancient way of being. For example, and this is just something that I noticed when I used to go to festivals a lot, I used to always dance bare feet. Like it was my thing. If there was a dance floor where there was rocks on the dance floor, or it was like prickly and they hadn't prepared that dance floor for people to dance bare feet, like the ancients once did, I would get so angry and upset. You know, I've even gone to promoters here in the US, because it's not really something promoters think about. They're like, oh yeah, just put up a huge stage, bang up a huge function one sound system, some lights, and everyone can go crazy. Now, that's all well and good, but what about the actual dance floor itself? You know, I've gone to dance floor where there's like boulders like all over the dance floor, like huge rocks, and I'm like running to the promoter like, dude, you want to get someone out there with rakes to just like rake that, you know, so we can like dance bare feet? That'd be awesome. So, you know, they're just simple things like that. But yeah, like bringing in fire, having like a central fire near the dance floor, like Azora is a great example of that. They have a massive fire that just happens, you know, 24/7 for that whole festival near the back of the dance floor, and it just creates this like ancient tribal gathering place. You know, we've communed with fire since, you know, probably since the story of Prometheus, right? When he stole it for us. Or if you take that story back, and it was actually from Africa, the jackal was the one who stole the fire from the gods. But yeah, so yeah, there's this like ancient communing with fire, with the earth, and yeah, I would love to see a further marriage of this ancient with this future. That's something that we need to be very aware of as we go forwards, is a balance. We have to know where we've come from and still connect with that, with the earth, with the trees, with everything. Because if we continue to quest for this, you know, ultra technologies, like a great example is like virtual reality. If we continue on a path of going headlong into that without actually having our feet on the earth, it's not going to be a very balanced and exciting future. You know, it'll be disconnection, right? Because the earth, she's energy, you know, and when we touch her, we connect with her like a circuit. So yeah, if we lose that connection, then it's kind of like game over, right? Yeah. That. Yeah. So yeah, I guess overall it's just a continual like reminder that we are here communing and dancing with the earth, no matter how far into the future we're going. There's always got to be this awareness of her.
I think that the festivals have provided an actual place for this to thrive and live. I mean, we've questioned this many, many times as to why specifically we're inside of this festival culture. I think when we first got in it was like, you know, brand new and so exciting, and things were actually evolving and moving. But just like anything, after time, politics get involved, you know, money and things shift and morph and change. And inside of that change, we both have decided, is this really the place that we should stay? Are these the people that we need to still continue to commune with? Or should we look outside of the festival culture? And we've both been shown that this particular place as this festival scene gets older, a lot of the people leave and these new people come in, and we are touching the mainstream. We are touching people that the subcultures and becoming a mainstream culture in a lot of ways, with Burning Man getting a lot of recognition publicly in the mainstream eye, and people are venturing to this place, and it almost feels like we are responsible in a way, like we're responsible to continue holding these things that we first experienced when we first came into festivals, which is this feeling of connection and feeling of magic in the air, and feeling like there was something more than just a rock concert, or just, people taking, a whole bunch of psychedelics and losing themselves, that there was something deeper than that. There was a bigger reason why we were there. And I think that that's what we're infusing inside of the art, is to continue breathing to people that these gatherings are powerful, and that we're just touching the surface of their potential. But there is a longing within many people who come to these events to experience something beyond themselves. And that's the responsibility that we both very much hold dear to us every single time we step on that stage. It's a service. So I think that the festival culture, like Yaegon said, is kind of in its kindergarten state, but has incredible potential to be something that I think the society at large needs, and maybe is a gateway and a doorway to start building these kinds of events more in our everyday life, or in our town, in our communal spaces. And that's slowly beginning to happen, where people are getting inspired by festivals and then bringing it into their hometown. So I think we're at the beginning of what really these festivals can be for people, and the way that they're continuing to inspire, influence people in everyday life, and how it ripples out from that point.
Yeah, as you're speaking, because I also do festivals, not as a musical performer, but as a speaker. And it's nice to hear you say that, because it's sort of like a reminder of why I like to do it as well. Because like, as I get older, as fun as it is, it's quite jarring on my system to spend long periods of time on tour, going to these festivals and being immersed in this wild energy for long periods of time. So that's a nice sort of evocation. Is that the way I'm looking to use it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, as I'm listening, and I want to be clear for people who are witnessing this conversation and sort of calculating or trying to unpack where you're coming from. When you're talking about ancient technologies and bringing them into the modern world, how do you differentiate those principles from the stereotype of the noble savage, wherein we prize and prioritize and put our ancient people on this pedestal, which they may deserve in some places but don't deserve in others? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, give us a little bit more specific of what's going on, because there's so many different ways that we can look at the indigenous that are currently on the planet, and then we're talking about the ancient, which is from a long time ago, that we all carry within our blood. So let's differentiate between like what's currently going on, because there's a lot of politics around what's happening currently to the indigenous peoples, and then where Yaegon and I are talking about from a long time ago, bringing something that we all used to live before modern day.
Yeah, no, that's a great clarification, and that's sort of the clarification I was looking for, is to sort of like to really clarify the difference between ancient technologies and stereotyping indigenous people as being like the perfect ones that came before us modern people broke. And fair enough, us modern people really did break a lot of the beauty of certain indigenous cultures in different places in the world, especially ones heavily impacted by colonialism, such as here in Canada and in the United States and in Australia as well. But I appreciate that differentiation between the type of stereotype that puts indigenous people on a pedestal, which is just as disrespectful as putting them in the dirt, because it doesn't see who they really are, and the exploration and celebration of ancient technologies of consciousness.
Yeah.
Yeah. I tell you something good it's great to bring to the table in this moment is, like, we've performed in, I think, about 34 countries now, and something that we hear in a lot of places, and we just heard it in our last show in Estonia. And, Estonia's in, like, northern Europe. It's right near Finland and Latvia. And, yeah, we didn't really know what to expect going there. And so whenever we arrive at a place, we always get the promoter or the driver or whoever picks us up from the airport to just start telling us some facts, some fun facts. And we found out that they had a very, like, deep pagan religion, a lot of witchcraft, which was, attempted to be snuffed out by the witch burnings and then the Soviets and the imposing, like, Catholicism over the top of it and all the rest of that. But they still have these magical forest places where people go and commune with forest spirits. So that was really cool. But another thing that came to the table was like, oh, yeah, where they're white people there, but they have just in the last, like, couple of decades come out of, basically an entire history of being subservient or taken over by other cultures. So, like, the Soviets had occupation there, and before that there was other ruling, like, warring tribes that came in and took them over. So basically the guy was like, yeah, we've been slaves to other oppressors for most of our history. Mm-hmm. And it's something we continue to hear. It's like there's always this story, like, in my country, in your country, in this country I'm in now, it's like, oh yeah, the white people came in, on boats, and they started shooting the indigenous, the savages. And we start to look as we go around the planet and realize, like, wow, this is happening and has happened not just white people to people with darker skin, but white people to white people, and even people with darker skin to other people with darker skin. So, like, in Africa, I'm reading a lot about Africa because we went there, what was that, December last year. And so I got deep into stories about Africa, and yeah, I found out, from people in Africa that the Bushmen were, in the south of Africa, and the Zulu people, or the, like, tribes from the center of Africa, came down and took over all those tribes down in the south. So there's continuous thing, even in New Zealand, everyone's like, oh, the Maori people, they're the indigenous. Well, actually, there were indigenous people before, and the Maoris came from another place and took the island for themselves and, moved the other people away or killed them or whatever. So it's this constant story, we can't differentiate between, like, oh, the oppressors and the oppressed. It's like we've all got that story. We all share it everywhere on the planet. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's a really cool thing I've been thinking about lately to bring to the table. It's like, instead of getting on our high horse about, oh, what did our people do here and there? It's like, oh no, this is an ancient story that's been continuing for a long time. And what's happening now? How are we bringing our awareness and presence to it? And how is that changing the story as we move forward?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I, not to jump in here, Eve, but I want to speak on that really quick, which is that it becomes clear the deeper you look, as long as you can let go of the victim narrative or the perpetrator narrative, that we all hold that inside of ourselves as potentials, as well as have actively played both sides simultaneously, but some more than others throughout the course of our lives. And our history is informed in that too. When I think about my own history, like, yeah, it's a general term, and in being a general term, it's an accurate term, but I'm a white guy. I'm a white guy who lives in Canada, which means that I am part of the colonial class that helped contribute to the attempted eradication of the indigenous cultures here. And yet I am also from a family of low-income working immigrants that fled to Canada to try to find some hope and prosperity where there was none. And the very fact that there was no hope and prosperity where they were was because whatever original lands and cultures they were living in also got crushed by something else. And so we have this story, and even the people who are crushing, it's like, why would you seek to dominate if you had not been crushed in your life and told that the only way to avoid that is to crush others? So, or explicitly or implicitly. So there's this really important acknowledgement that we're all in this together. There's important considerations between like actual conduct between people and protection and boundaries and appropriate responses to crime and stuff like this. But it's also, I think, really important that we acknowledge that we're all in this together.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's where I believe that the narrative, the Western narrative, is up for review on many levels in many directions, and this is one of them. I strongly believe that it's this awakening, to become aware of first of all, who are our ancestors, asking questions about our history. There's many people, in America who come from many different bloodlines. We are a mixed people, the majority of us. So when you start looking to the history, and right now we have the being blessed in the fact that we get to go to these different countries and we get to be in these different lands and we get to learn the history from not a book, but from listening to people speak. And for me, it's been a profound opening to understand the stories that are all in common, the shared frustration and feeling of overwhelm as our governments are destroying our environment and creating all sorts of interesting dialogues between people, and people are really coming together in different ways, or speaking to the fact how we're not coming together, or there's still separation, and not being okay with that anymore. Really feeling the need to start questioning things. And I think that's where narrative comes in. And I think that's where art has a big role to play, because we get to open people's minds to the fact that we carry so much different lineage within our own blood. I think the 23andMe movement, like a lot of people getting their DNA, and then me watching YouTube videos about people who say that they hate a certain culture or race, and they get their blood work back and they're like, oh, I'm actually 23% of that blood or that culture, right? Mm-hmm. So it's dismantling our racism. It's dismantling these false constructs of ideas that these people are different over here than these people. It's really finding out, oh no, actually we have the same cousins and the same this and that, and we're actually connected, right? Mm-hmm. And then we start moving it back out of idealizing, the indigenous, or saying, I think this is something that we do in Western culture. We come with an ideal, like an image, a god, a goddess, indigenous, like these are these perfect people. It's like, no, they're humans. And we're all sharing this collective narrative in this current time. And when we talk about going into the ancient, we're talking about going backwards in a connection to the earth. And that's ultimately what the ancient is about. It's this reconnection, this place where we were tuning in with this intelligence that came from the earth herself, through plants, through animals, through the sky, and being more aware and being more connected. So when we talk about ancient technology, we're talking about these things that were before modern ideas and idealisms. We're talking about these things that are innate to every human on the planet. Just by breathing and just by putting your hands on the earth and the trees, there's these information streams that are available to all of us. And these were things that were more prevalent in the collective, society than they are now. And so that's our role. That's our role, is to bring these ancient memories back to the people and reconnect them back to the earth. And we call it lovingly ancient future now. It means like it's the ancient, it's from a long time ago, but it's also where we're going, and it's also in this present moment now with us. So it's this reference to the eternal. It's these pieces of us that are always there, have always been there, and something that we as a collective have forgotten, that we're on a mission to reconnect inside of this time. So yeah, it's a good topic, because I think for me, I get the the luxury of being the physical image of the music when I'm up there with a headdress and I'm up there with feathers and I'm up there with makeup. And in the past, people have, said something like, well, why are you wearing this? Or what are you doing? And I'm intentionally not using a specific culture when I'm up there. If you notice, I'm taking elements and ideas and inspiration, but by no means am I attempting to, be disrespectful. Everything that I'm doing is in complete respect and trying to open our doorway visually and through art to have us all reconnect with using these items in dance and in ceremony are as old as time, and they are our birthright as human beings. You just have to be human. You don't have to be a certain color or from a certain place. Like, this is your birthright to be able to celebrate and to understand that these are these pathways that are open to you and for you, and they're actually beckoning and asking us to come back to them, to come back to the drum, to come back to the feathers, to come back to these beautiful garb pieces that then all of a sudden I become the bird, or I become, these different stories. So it's important for us. It's important that we don't get into a narrow point of view when we talk about these things. It's important that we keep opening and keep exploring and keep the innocence and the love there. And ultimately, we're going for unification.
Yeah. In light of that, I would love to say that the way that this term cultural appropriation is being used is kind of like another form of racism, like how extreme it gets. Because if an individual is celebrating a culture from a place of joy and reverence, like, it doesn't matter that they're wearing a traditional something from that tribe. They're doing it in love and to continue the story. And unless that tribe has said, no, that particular thing is sacred and, you're not allowed to wear that unless you're in ceremony or whatever. Like in Australia, there's the bull roarer, which is like a thing that spins around and makes this whooping sound. And traditionally that's only used by men to summon spirits. So there's a reverence. If you know the story and you approach that instrument, you have to use it in that specific way. So yeah, I get a little bit, my feathers ruffled a little bit because, someone will write to me like, oh, that's culturally inappropriate that you're using traditional instruments in your music. I'm like, wow, since when did people tell other people they couldn't play instruments?
Mm-hmm.
It kind of feels like a form of like racism and control, So it's cool to bring to presence to this story. There's always that classic thing of like, oh, there's a drunk guy at a festival who's wearing a war bonnet and he's not giving reverence to the Native American people by doing that. Yeah, for sure. But do you go up and do you like hammer him and make an example of him and make him feel shame? Or do you sit down and try and explain a story to him about where that's from and how it's traditionally used? Mm-hmm. This is how we can approach it a different way.
Yeah, I appreciate that perspective, or I can appreciate that perspective. I know for myself, I do think that what is meant, remember I said I wasn't feeling very good earlier. What people intend to confer when they say cultural appropriation is you're disrespecting a culture that we have played a part in dismantling, a violent part in dismantling. And in that sense, I think it's actually really great that we have this concept to think about. And that we have that as a sense of like, yeah, that drunk guy wearing a war bonnet, that's very culturally inappropriate. But I love where you're coming from, which is like, so what's the response to that? Do we then attack that person? Because I've spoken with you about this privately, and you've mentioned, like something inside of this person was called to that. Something inside of them was called to this ancient part of themselves, or like this trying to recreate the essence of what they see that war bonnet represents to this small and obviously very ignorant understanding they have of the culture. And when we attack them, we sort of crush that. And by crushing it, there's like an overreaction, which can create just more violence and conflict. And at the same time, when it becomes an issue, that issue should be addressed, and we should address it as a community in some way. But there's also a possibility that at some point it gets wildly out of control, and people begin, the self-righteous indignation goes on high alert, and virtue signaling is all over the place, and people are ready to call out and tear down anyone, simply for the nature that for a second, their behavior made them slightly uncomfortable, rather than making the effort to stand in that discomfort and try to come to a place of understanding with that person. That's not always the case, and sometimes you need to call out and tear down, and you have to do that sometimes to protect yourself or to protect your community, understandably, so it's not a hard and fast line. But I definitely think considering the nuances of this topic is actually quite important.
Yeah.
Speaking of nuances of topics, currently a not so nuanced large topic that has incredible nuances is the subjugation of women, particularly insofar as sexual assault in the larger culture. And generally there's the presentation, and I certainly have seen it in myself and seen it in the world around me, that men are given a little bit more priority when it comes to doing something big, and women are often sort of either taught to keep themselves small or are attacked in some way for trying to make themselves big, or just generally aren't given the opportunity to step into a really powerful role. And Eve, I know that you've been teaching about this at festivals over the last couple of years, about being a powerful, we'll say unapologetic feminine woman. And I've spoken with you as well about the challenges that you've faced in festival culture and with festival organizers, which basically go, oh, you're the dancer, well, you're a second-class citizen to Yaegon, right? Yeah. So can you talk a little bit about the challenges you've faced as a woman to make your stance and to take the power, to take the powerful place that you've earned in the midst of this very sexist culture?
Yeah. Wow, this one's a really deep subject to me on so many levels. Because, a lot of the festival culture, they like to speak about the goddess. Again, we'll go to that story. Many people speak this name, the goddess, but they don't really know the stories. They don't know what that really means. And we, in our modern Western society, generally do not respect women. Women are considered objects. They are objects of our desire. They are, objects of property. And we think that these are old concepts, but they're very much alive. And they're so just deep in the psyche of the people that most men don't even realize, and most women don't even realize how they're being objectified and how they're being treated. So when it comes to coming into these places and delivering these stories and these messages, it's been quite challenging to, first of all, I'm not in the music scene, so that's a big thing against me. And what's interesting is that I actually have female producers that are not supportive of me either. So I'm even a lower class, because the musicians and the music people are what you see in the limelight, so they're kind of the top of the pyramid. And the performers, in general, are not given any kind of money or compensation for their time. They're readily available. There are tons of young females ready to jump on that stage at any second. So there's not really a value structure right now as an art form. So I'm coming in at the lowest ranking and attempting to bring art forward and attempting to bring a message inside of a dance music scene, and I'm doing theater, so I'm really kind of the odd man out in so many ways, and I'm a woman. So I am faced with being in front of people, and people have a certain idea of what I should be and the role that I should be. Let's look at any kind of singer in pop music, Western pop music, and she's more than likely usually a sex object. And if she's not a sex object and she's not putting herself out there as sexy, then she's some kind of rebel or kind of badass kind of lady, right? So she's like either like this alpha, like masculine, like don't fuck with me, or you've got this woman who's like ultra feminine and just trying to seduce you. So because I'm playing with archetypes, I'm playing with how can I bring a new narrative? How can I touch people and start letting them explore what it feels like to touch the feminine, which is more than just her body. The feminine is feelings. The feminine is sensitive and intuitive and has this whole realm of mystery available at our fingertips. So how can I bring them into the mystery? How can I bring them into feeling themselves, into feeling me as a person, as a human being? And so recently, within the past like 3-4 years, I started literally intentionally covering my entire body. And so a lot of the images that you'll see of me, I do not have any skin showing except for my hands and my face. And this is a statement that I'm making artistically. It's basically saying, if all you look at it as me, as a woman, is just flesh, then look at my flesh that is attempting to touch and express your soul, right? So it's inviting and attempting to create this new idea or this new way, in a Western way, to feel her, to touch her, and to sense her, and to reconnect with that part of ourself that is her. Because whether you're a man or a woman, you have a feminine essence and you have a masculine essence, and this problem of imbalance is really what we're talking about. It's not giving our feminine that voice and that place to be seen. So in a public way, that's what I'm advocating. I'm advocating that we look at ourselves as more than just a body, and that we actually listen. And so then I begin to take people into my world by listening to the music and allowing the music to start opening my soul. And in this way, inviting the feminine essence to be honored and to be loved again, which I think is something that we need. And it's extremely challenging to do this as a woman. I am one of the only women that have been, in those higher places of headliner. You'll see usually all men. So even to other female producers, I make a point of connecting with them, because I realize the way that we're treated backstage is disgusting in a lot of ways. I mean, if you really look at it, we're not looked at in the eye. Sometimes tech people won't even acknowledge our presence. And I get to see it as a contrast because Yaegon's right next to me. So they'll look at him with these, starry eyed, and then they don't even look at me. So it's to the point, where I'm hired to be there. There's no lights for me. There's no space for me to stand. And then when I ask for that, it's an issue. Even though the stage is filled with lights and obviously it's supposed to be filled with space, and this is where performance is supposed to live. So it's just so many times, even just showing Yaegon, because at first Yaegon couldn't fully see it. And he's like, I don't know what you mean. And I said, okay, let me just start showing you just the subtle ways in which it starts happening. And then as show after show after show, he started seeing, like, didn't matter what country we're inside of. It's everywhere. It's not just America. And yeah, so again and again and again, and to the point where I've told him, I said, I would never do this if I didn't have you by my side. It is the masculine that is in Yaegon that is holding the space for the feminine to be heard and to be seen. And I feel like that's also in his music. And because it's so challenging, because it's so starkly just, yeah, I don't want to use really intense words, but it's heartbreaking on many levels to attempt to try to bring something through this platform and then to not be respected as a human being. It's just, yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot. So, and I think that's why there aren't more women who are in this current position. And I think that's why you don't see many women artists in general.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. There's a really understandable response to all of that, which would be to hate men, and to blame men, and to get into a situation where, you know, you reclaim your power by denouncing or calling out the perpetrator. And in what you just described, you talked about the importance of this relationship to Yaegon and the balance between you two. And I understand that for listeners, you're talking from your own personal experiences, like as being in a heteronormative binary gender relationship with each other. So just kind of putting that on the table. But I'm curious now for the final question about what it is that, oh, hold on. Here comes the question. It's bubbling up. I understand that you two recognize your connection with each other as something very sacred, and that there's a sacred relationship there, and that the way that you engage your life and your relationship is not really all that dissimilar from the way you engage your art, similar philosophical underpinnings. So I'm curious if you could both speak to what it means for you to be in a sacred partnership with each other, and how that contributes to not only your experience of life, but also your art forms as a whole.
Wow. I think this continues with this massive healing that has to happen for both men and women. So recognizing the potency and the power of surrendering to the fact that we need each other. We ultimately, at the heart of hearts, we love each other so much. As man and woman on this planet, co-creating this reality, we love each other. And that love is where our devotion is. So when we come together and we realize that people are hurting in their family unit, they don't have a loving idea of the father and a loving idea of the mother. And there's a lot of trauma, that's happened on the planet to bring those two people apart. And, with this idea of lots of divorce and lots of drama and karma and all these things, it's so important to have these ancient places where we still see the great father and the great mother actually together in unison, co-creating their children of life and animals and trees and all these things. So we've noticed that we've taken on these archetypal roles to be the great mother and to be the great father. And when we actually come together physically on stage, there's a moment in the trance set where I stand behind Yaegon and I open like these wings that are behind him. So it's this coming together of the Merkaba. It's the masculine and the feminine overlapping and coming together, and there's this union. And when we do that, we literally hear the people in the audience take a deep breath in and are just in awe that a man and a woman are loving each other in a non-sexual way, that they're coming together and honoring each other. And when we first started doing that on stage, we started to realize this responsibility that we had. It's like, wow, people are aching for this. They need to know that the father loves the mother and that the mother loves the father, and that there's this inner child within all of us that is wounded and still wanting to believe that love is real and that love is true because of the current narrative in our reality, which, is demolishing love in many, many ways and many forms. So it's a big one, and it's something that we don't take lightly, and it's something that we feel is super, super important, is to keep honoring both the masculine and feminine, and doing it on a personal level, and then into the art, and then in front of thousands of people, and doing it from a place of authenticity. And I think that's the difference. It's like coming in with a real, genuine, like you feel the connection between he and I. It's not something that we're putting on. It's not like a pretend pageant. It's not like, oh, look at me, I'm touching him, or it's none of that. It's like, it's authentic. It's part of it. it's real, and you get to like touch it. And I think that is what's really, what's really powerful and what people are really connecting with, that authenticity. And on many levels, that's a whole other part, I think, that people need, is to feel realness, instead of fake or something put on.
Yeah, my mum and dad are still together after all these years, and there's they went through their tough times, the whole family did, but there's just something cozy in my heart when you think about mum and dad, and the journey that they've been on together, and something else I used to, and still notice, but I used to pick it up when I was a kid, was noticing certain types of birds and how there's always like two of them. And when I started getting deeper into birds, I found out that those species of birds, all the different ones, I'm like finding out that they mate for life, and that the two of them just kind of cruise around and do their thing. And then of course, growing up with like amazing movies like Princess Bride in the 80s, there's this like this concept of this like true love, this which is presented as a fantasy, but it's actually a reality as well. So yeah, it's awesome to be doing this together and to bring that to the stage and just amplify that out. It's powerful and it's needed.
Maybe just as one final question, and I'm not sure what the question is, but it has to do with the fact that non-monogamous lifestyles currently are extremely popular amongst the youth, amongst a lot of people, myself included. And there is an understandable, it can be a very creative choice, and it can also be an understandably reactive choice to protect ourselves from the wounds we see inflicted upon the people we care about, upon ourselves, and upon really the world, that has been the result of an unconscious monogamy that's really structured in husbandry and the subjugation of women and the ignorant, like the toxic forms of the patriarchy. Yeah. So I'm curious, what is this question? I meet so few people, who are at a place in their relationship where they actively choose to be in a loving, monogamous partnership with each other, in the midst of an environment that is very non-monogamous, polyamory, and often quite dismissive of monogamy as being unevolved or ignorant. So I'm just curious if there's anything you would like to say about that before we tie up the show.
Yeah, I think that in all of my teachings and everything that I've experienced, I have loved relationship in the sense of just learning it from a psychological point of view. What makes a relationship, what creates the drama between people, and what is that drama ultimately doing in the evolution of the people, right? So when I was young, I came from a divorced family. When I was really little, I kind of thought to my head, I'm like, okay, marriage doesn't work. So I grew up with that narrative. And when I was older, I went to lots of parties that had this West Coast free love kind of vibe, really loving the idea of not having this thing around love be taboo in any way, right? So really had that rebellion of just like, yeah, we get to do whatever we want. And yeah, it's really fun that, those people are together, but they're in an open relationship, and I can flirt with the guy and I can flirt with the girl. And that was liberating for me. I would even go to parties that were all based on that freedom of expression. So I think that there's a healthiness, and just like anything, there's a balance to everything. And what I found for me personally is that, relationships bring up a lot of inner child wounds, and they bring up to the surface things that you just wouldn't have with a friend. So there's a holiness to them, in the sense that if you go into a relationship knowing that this being is going to be a reflection ultimately of you and your unconscious woundings, then if you want to, you can use that relationship to evolve yourself. Mm-hmm. And so when we talk about consciousness and we talk about these higher levels of love, we are ultimately talking about higher levels of understanding the self. And so for Yaegon and I, the ultimate is to actually stay with this mirror reflection and really go deep. And when you disperse your energy and you have many partners, that potency isn't quite as strong as when you actually go in intentionally with one being for a certain amount of time and really sit with what's coming up, because there's stuff that's coming up. We've been together 6 years this year, and there's stuff that's coming up that we never felt, experienced ever. And now we're coming to the 6th year and we're like, whoa, what's all this stuff? So it's like a up leveling.
And mind you, that 6 years of being very, very devoted to bringing presence into the relationship and into all the woundings. Mm. And even now, 6 years in, it's still just like, whoa, it's revealing more. Mm. Yeah.
Mm. So I think that there's a lot to that. Like, what's your intention for a relationship, and also what stage are you in? When we're first beginning, I think it's great to explore and to feel what like feels good for you and what doesn't feel good for you. And then, at a certain point you get older and you're like, okay, that's not so much what I want anymore. Maybe this is what I want more. And so you're staying in an open place. I don't think there's any hard rules, especially when it comes to love. There's no hard rules. And ultimately, if you're going in for wanting deep connection and deep experiences with people, you put in the time. So whether that's to one person or to many people, it's you understanding that this is a possible catalyst, for you, and to be able to use the depth and the beauty and the preciousness of love to open you, to crack you open, to bring forward all of your pain for review and for transmutation ultimately. So I celebrate it all, and for Yaegon and I, we're loving the hard level. We're loving the college work here, and we're going deep, and then it infuses into the art. So I think that we also have a different dynamic where our work and our relationship are all interlaced and feeding each other. And for right now, this feels really, really good to really challenge ourselves. And we're constantly on the road. We're constantly just having to deal with life situations on the fly, and we're best friends. So it just feels really good right now to be in this kind of dynamic and to really honor what's happening, because we realize it is very precious and very rare when you're able to have this kind of experience. And I think every day we talk about that. We never take it for granted. We always think and never think that tomorrow is a promise. We in this thing of marriage, the biggest thing we didn't like was this time thing, like this forever thing. We know that this could end at any time, and I think that that's beautiful. Like when you know that something is precious and at any moment it can be taken away from you, it gives you this appreciation in a deeper way. So yeah, I think that there's a bigger narrative that wants to be told around marriage and about what real marriage is, which is honoring each other and being with each other as long as it feels good. And then when it doesn't feel good anymore, being okay with that changing, and our society being okay with that changing, mm-hmm. and having more of this openness towards any kind of love and any kind of expression, men, women, men, however it goes.
Mm-hmm. And just to be clear, when you say that it no longer feels good, you mean that it no longer feels right to continue? Because I believe, and pardon me if I'm projecting, that it has not felt good the entire time.
Right. Yeah, when it doesn't feel good, when it gets painful, you go deeper and you're like, okay, figure it out. But if there's a point where if someone is like, I have feelings for someone else, or, hey, I'm going this way, or this is where I want to start going in my life, having that openness to talk about those things and having that trust with each other, I think is really, really, really important.
Excellent. Thanks. Yaegon, I'd love for you to weigh in on this topic as well.
Well, she pretty much summed it up. I guess let's see. I'll get figurative. I'll get like symbolic here. Everyone's always caught up on the binary of our existence, but I always look for the trinary, like the Trinity, and in like like a proton electron creates an atom, man, woman, child. There's always this like third thing, right? And in a relationship where there's two individuals, it's like the two individuals creates the ship that the relating happens on. So it's and that ship is like, it can be a ship that's voyaging through the ocean of emotion, or it could be cruising through the cosmos of the mental space and the fields. And it's like it's learning, because the two of you are piloting that ship together, and you're going into the unknown constantly. So yeah, for me, it's an exciting place, because it's like, where are we going on this ship of relating? And so yeah, I always bring it into that, this like this container that we're creating, the ship, and yeah, what are we learning, and what are we gaining from it? So yeah.
And what adventures? It's like, choose your own adventure.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Cool. Well, Eve, Yaegon, thank you so much for joining me here on the show today. It was really nice to talk with you again, and I believe we're seeing each other this summer, I think, as well, aren't we? What's that?
I hope so.
Yeah, I hope so too. What links would you like the listeners to be directed towards where they can follow up on what you are doing separately and together?
Yeah, so merkabamusic.com for all of the beautiful music vibrations, and evocationsacredart.com for all the performance vibrations.
Great. And your social media handles are?
Yeah, what we got, Facebook, like Kalya Scintilla and Merkaba, both in Facebook, and what's the other one? Instagram.
Great. Well, I'll make sure that the links to all your social media stuff and the music will be contained at the show notes to this episode at jameswjesso.com. And excellent having you around. Nice talking to you again.
Awesome. Thanks, bro.
And cut.
Thank you very much for listening to this episode of Adventures Through the Mind. If you liked what you heard and you're curious about what Eve and Yaegon offer to the world, I highly suggest you check out some of Yaegon's musical work under the aliases of Kalya Scintilla or Merkaba, or you could check out Eve's performance art group called Evocation Sacred Art. Links to all of that are going to be contained in the description to this episode on jameswjesso.com. In fact, if you like the song that was at the beginning of the show, it will be specifically mentioned in that description, and if you like the song that you're hearing right now, it's off the same album. So a big thanks to Yaegon for the permission to use his songs for the intro and for the outro, and I hope all of you really enjoy what you discover when you look more deeply into these two incredible artists' work. Finally, if you'd like to support the show, you can share it with a friend on whatever social media platform you best enjoy, although another great way to do that is to support financially. You can do that by becoming my patron on Patreon, or you can leave me a one-time donation either on PayPal or some form of cryptocurrency such as Bitcoin or Litecoin. Another way you could support is actually by buying copies of my books. I have 2 books that are out, Decomposing the Shadow and the True Light of Darkness, that are both about my explorations with psilocybin mushrooms as agents of personal healing and spiritual transformation. Again, you've heard me say it a bunch of times now, but links to all of this are contained in the show notes to jameswjesso.com. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you on the next episode of Adventures Through the Mind.